Okay, so we're going to continue talking about factor by grouping. So it is going to look very similar to what we just did, except in these examples, you're going to notice that there are times when you're going to have to rearrange the terms so that it is factorable by grouping. So for example, let's look at this example. Let's suppose I want to factor this polynomial. So let's say we had 30uv plus 30u plus 36u squared plus 25v. So let's suppose I had that. Okay, so again, I have this polynomial, I have these four terms, and when you have four terms, you want to see if it's factorable by grouping. Now, before I begin, you should always look. One of the things you're going to learn in the next section is that you should always look to see if every term has a common factor other than 1. So if you look at every term, not every term has a u in it, not every term has a v in it, and the GCF of 30, 30, 36, and 25 is 1. Okay, so besides 1, these four terms do not have any other common factor except 1. Alright, so that idea is going to be important in the next video. But let's group the first two and group the last two. So in the first group, I can factor out the GCF is 30u. 30u. So I'm going to get 30u times v plus 1. So 30u times v is 30uv, and then 30u times a positive 1 is a 30u. And then over here, I can factor out, well, the GCF here is 1. That's the GCF. So you get 36u squared plus 25v. And again, notice that these factors and these two terms here, these factors are not identical. And you didn't even have to go through this route. Some of you could have noticed that just off the bat that there's no way, when you just looking at it, when you take the GCF out of each one, that what's left is going to be the same. All right, but we did write it out, and so we notice here that the way we grouped did not work. The way we grouped did not work. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to rearrange the terms so that way when we group them, hopefully it will work. Okay, so let's rearrange the terms. Remember, there are four terms. It does not matter which one you put first, second, third, or fourth. All right, you can just try combinations until it works. If it doesn't work, if nothing works after all these combinations, then you would say does not factor. Okay, so let's rearrange them. So I'm going to leave the 30uv first. I'll write that first, and then I'm going to put the 25v second, and then I'm going to leave these two terms alone for right now in that order. Okay? Alright, so notice that this polynomial is identical to this one. Alright? They're the same polynomial, it's just a different order. Alright, now let's group the first two. And the first two, I can factor out the GCF here is 5v. So I can write this as 5v times, and then 5v times 6u is 30uv, plus 5v times 5 is 25v. Over here, I can factor out a positive 6u. Positive 6u. And I'm going to end up with, okay, so 6u times 5 is 30u, plus 6u times 6u, 6u times 6u is 36u squared. Okay? Now, look at these two terms again, and notice that these factors here are identical. They're the same factor. All right, so remember, they're not written in the same order, 6u plus 5, 5 plus 6u, but remember, addition is commutative. Addition is commutative. So that means that the order in which you add does not matter. The order in which you add does not matter. So in other words, 5 plus 6u is the same as 6u plus 5. And that's what we had here, right here. Okay? So I'm going to rewrite this. So I get 5v times 6u plus 5 plus 6u times 6u plus 5. Okay? Alright, same as this, because 6u times 6u is 36u squared, and then 6u times 5 is still 30u. Okay? We just changed the order. Okay, so now we can factor out the 6u plus 5. I've got the parentheses. And then I'm left with 5v plus 6u. Right, so there's your answer. Okay, so now let's look at this example. So let's factor. So I have 2x squared plus y minus x minus 2xy. Okay, so 2x squared plus y minus x minus 2xy. All right, so again, we have this polynomial, these four terms. Let's group the first two and group the last two and see what happens. So if I group the last two, the GCF is 1. All right, so I'm going to say 1 times 2x squared plus y. Over here, remember the third term's negative, factor out a negative factor. So over here, I'm going to factor out a negative x. So they have an x in common. And let's think about how we're going to rewrite what's inside the parentheses. Negative x times a positive 1 is a negative x. A negative times a positive is a negative. So, but a negative x times a positive 2y, a negative x times a positive 2y gives me a negative 2xy. But again, if I look at what's inside the parentheses here, they're not identical. It doesn't even look like this right here. Rather. Remember, 6u plus 5 is the same as 5 plus 6u. These are totally different. So again, that implies that I need to rearrange the order. Okay, rearrange the order. All right, so what I'm going to try now is this. I'm going to rewrite it as 2x squared plus y, 2x squared plus y, minus, so I'm going to just change this around. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me change it. 2x squared minus x, rather. 2x squared minus x. I'm going to put these two together, and then put these two together. Minus 2xy plus y. Right, so make sure you see that these four terms right here are these same four terms here. Okay, just rewritten in a different order. Okay, let's group. And so we get, I can factor out an x here. I'm left with 2x minus 1. I'm going to factor out a negative y. And I'm left with 2x. Now, always be careful with when you factor out a negative. Negative y times a positive 2x is a negative 2xy. And negative y times a negative 1 is a positive y. All right, and then again, if you notice, these are the same. So this order is the one that's going to help me. So factor out a 2x minus 1, and you're left with x minus y. Right, and so there's your answer. Okay. Now, let me do this. Now, remember, this is the order in which I wrote it. Okay, remember this? That's the order in which I wrote it. But let's suppose someone else had written this order. All right, so let's instead of saying minus 2xy plus y, someone else could have said 2x squared minus x, keeping these the same, and then plus y minus 2xy. Someone else could have said that. All right, so let's see what to do if that's the case. Now remember, these four terms, this polynomial is the same as this polynomial, is the same as this polynomial. It's just that the order of the terms differ from each one. Okay, so let's kind of look at this. If I factor out the x here, I get 2x minus 1, just like we did here. Factor out the x, you get 2x minus 1. Now over here, now remember, you're going to factor out the positive GCF here. So the positive, so you factor out a positive y, and you're left with 1 minus 2x. Okay. Now, let's just kind of review something from a previous course, and it's called opposites. So let's talk about opposites for a moment. The idea of opposites. So remember, in a previous course, 3 and negative 3 are opposites. 3 and negative 3 are opposites. So one of the things that means is that if you were to put those two numbers in the number line, here's negative 3, here's positive 3, those two numbers are on opposite sides of 0 and the same distance from 0, so their absolute values would be the same. Okay? Another thing you may remember about opposites is that if you find their quotient, you take the quotient. If you divide these two numbers, 3 divided by negative 3, you're going to get a negative 1. Okay? Alright, so remember, opposites differ by negative 1. The signs are going to differ by a negative. So in other words, if you look at this, 2x, its opposite is a negative 2x. A negative 1, its opposite is a positive 1. Alright, so those two factors here are opposites. Now before we go on with this, you see how this term is listed first? I mean, the x term is listed first inside the parentheses. Let's just go ahead and rewrite this so that the x term here is listed first. So I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So I'm just going to rewrite this over, plus y. So all I did was just rewrite the first 4. Now in this parentheses, I'm going to put the x first. Now remember, addition is commutative. So 1 plus a negative 2x, 1 plus a negative 2x is the same as negative 2x plus 1. All right. Now I have the x's listed first and the constant listed second. Okay, now here's what you got to do. Remember, they're opposites, right? So these two factors are opposites. So that means that they're going to differ by a when you find their quotient, it's going to be a negative 1. So what you have to do is this. Right here, you're going to factor out a negative 1 from here. Factor out a negative 1 from here because these two factors are opposites. So when you factor out a negative 1, you're going to ask yourself, negative 1 times what is a negative 2x? So you can say 2x. A negative 1 times what is a positive 1? You can say negative 1. And now see right here? That is now the same as that. So I'm going to get x, just write this over, times 2x minus 1. And then right here, a positive y times a negative 1. A positive y times negative 1. I'm going to take this off. Positive y times negative 1 is now a negative y times 2x minus 1. Alright, so positive y times a negative 1, because that's what this was. Remember, that's y times this. Y times this. But this factor right here becomes negative 1 times 2x minus 1. So y times a negative 1 is a negative y times 2x minus 1. Okay, so now I can factor out a 2x minus 1. And when you factor out the 2x minus 1, you're left with x minus y, and which is what this was. Okay. All right. Now this factor, the order in which you wrote these terms made the problem easier, and the order in which you wrote these terms, you had a little bit of work to do. You had to use the idea of opposites. Okay. All right, let's look at a couple more examples. So let's look at this one. Okay, so again, you're going to factor. All right, and so let's suppose we had, let's suppose we had this example. 2kp squared plus 6 minus 3p squared minus 4k. Or suppose we had that one. So 2kp squared plus 6 minus 3p squared minus 4k. All right, so again, if you group the first two and group the last two, from the first two, the GCF is a 2, and so you get kp squared plus 3. Over here, the GCF is a negative 1, and so you get 3p squared plus 4k. Because a negative times a positive is a negative times a positive is a negative. But again, that didn't help at all because what's inside the parentheses here are not identical. They're not identical. So that grouping, this grouping right here, is not the order in which you want to write this. So we have to rearrange the order. Okay, so let's rearrange the order. So let's rearrange it this way. I'm going to keep the first one first for right now. So 2kp squared. Let's put this term with it. So minus 3p squared, and then I'm going to have plus 6 minus 4k. All right, plus 6 minus 4k. All right. So from the first group, I can factor out a p squared. So that's a GCF, p squared. So I get, oops. All right, that's fine. This is the same as this. So I'm going to get p squared times 2k minus 3. So p squared times 2k is 2kp squared. P squared times a negative 3 is a negative p squared. And then I'm going to factor out from here, a positive 2. And you get 2 times 3 is 6. And then 2 times a negative 2k. 2 times a negative 2k is a negative 4k. All right. Okay. So again, that brings us back to that previous example. So see how you have 2k minus 3 and 3 minus 2k? Remember, they're opposites because 2k, the opposite is a negative 2k, and negative 3, the opposite is a positive 3. All right, but let's go ahead and just rearrange these two terms so that way the k is listed first. So I'm going to get p squared times 2k minus 3 plus 2 times a negative 2k plus 3. So remember, 3 plus a negative 2k is a negative 2k plus 3. So addition is commutative. Now, remember, these are opposites. So for this one right here, you're going to factor out a negative 1. And when you do that, negative 1 times 2k is a negative 2k. And negative 1 times a negative 3 is a positive 3. Now remember, you're saying a positive 2 times this. But remember, this is now this. So positive 2 times a negative 1 is a negative 2. So I'm going to get p squared times 2k minus 3. Remember, positive 2 times a negative 1 is a negative 2. And then times 2k minus 3. Okay? And look, before we go on, just double check. Okay, p squared times 2k is 2p squared. That was the original, right? And then p squared times a negative 3 is a negative 3p squared. That's what we got here. A negative 2 times a positive 2k is a negative 4k. And a negative 2 times a negative 3 is a positive 6. Okay? All right. So then we can factor out a 2k minus 3. And I'm left with the factor p squared minus 2. Okay? All right, so that's the answer to that one. All right, so now let's look at this example. Let's suppose we had, and this is going to be number 68 from your book, and that's on page 386. All right, so let's suppose we had this. We had 7x minus 21 plus x squared. Oops, that's x cubed. X cubed minus 2x squared. Okay? Okay, so that's what we get. Let's group the first two and the last two. So from the first two, I can factor out a 7. and I'm left with x minus 3. 7 times a negative 3 is negative 21. From the second group, I can factor out a x squared, and I'm left with, remember, x squared times x is x cubed. When you multiply like bases, you add exponents, minus 2. All right, so notice that these factors here, that's in these two terms, these factors are not identical. They're not even opposites. Okay, so let's rearrange and see what happens. So let's put the 7x and x cubed together and see what happens. So 7x plus x cubed minus 21 minus 2x squared. All right, so I just put these two terms together and just rewrote the other ones. Let's see what happens. So here now the GCF is x. And I'm left with 7 plus x squared, right? Over here, I'm going to factor out a, actually all I can do is factor out a negative 1. And that'll be 21 plus 2x squared. And notice these two factors are not identical. All right. Now let's rearrange again. So I'm going to leave the 7x first. All right. So remember what I did. The negative 21 was listed first. Then that didn't work. So then I put the 7x with the x cubed. That didn't work. So now let's put the 7x with the negative 2x squared. Let's see if that works. And then so I'm putting the 7x with the negative 2x squared, and I'm going to rewrite these down. So minus 21 plus x cubed. Okay, so let's factor and see what happens. So from here, I can take out an x. That's your GCF for these two terms. I'm left with 7 minus 2x. Over here, right away you notice it's not going to work, but let's just continue. You can factor out a negative 1, and you're left with 21 minus x cubed. So again right here, they're not identical. So that didn't work. All right, so remember I exhausted all possibilities. I did the first term with the second term. I did the first term with the third term, that's this one. And I did the first term with the fourth term, and that's this one. Nothing worked. So that means that this polynomial up here cannot be factored. So you just say cannot be factored. All right, so in MyMathLab, there are a couple of problems, at least one problem where one of them will be cannot be factored. And on the worksheet, it is possible that one of them, at least one, will not be factorable. Okay, so that's going to end this video.